Nick, I'm going to attempt to do this entire episode as Terry Silver. So we're going to talk Karate Kid Part 3. We're back in the world of the Karate Kid, of course, with Cobra Kai being what it is today. And of course, we know that our fans in the show really liked our episodes on the Karate Kids Part 1 and 2. So naturally, we had to revisit this world with Karate Kid Part 3. And
this is the first time I've ever watched this movie.
This is the first time I ever watched this movie. So we lived through it together. We're part of this. And I guess when we talked about the first two Karate Kids, I compared them to Rocky movies. I said the first one is like Rocky 1. It's a very character-driven piece, very like slow, methodical, more focused on the character than the karate. Karate Kid Part 2 is more like Rocky 3. It's got a little bit of that flair to it, a little bit more of the cheese. Not as successful, but maybe more fun. This is like Rocky 5. In that, like, there's some things I really like about the film, but it's easily the worst one I've seen so far.
Terry Silver's house, isn't that the same from Rocketeer?
I don't know if it's the same from Rocketeer, but it's definitely that
I think it's got to be the same.
It might be.
It's got to be the same place. Now, the reason why I didn't see this movie is because it didn't really get a lot of, I was 12 at the time. But my God, in summer of '89, we had such awesome movies. So we had like Last Crusade, Indiana Jones' Last Crusade. And if you lived in '89, you knew Batman bombarded everything. He was in every fast food place, commercial, and he started a cartoon, for God's sakes. And after that, after a month of Batman kicking over in the whole month of June, this movie comes out and it's like, well, we're done with that. We're moving forward. We're done with the 80s almost. And this movie kind of seems almost like we're the last gasps of 80s. I talked about how The Rocketeer is kind of the last of 80s action movies, but this is kind of the last action movie of the 80s in the 80s. Yeah,
it's like a car running out of gas, really. Like, we get Ralph Macchio as Daniel LaRusso, which at this point, just call it the Karate Man. We know he's like 27 years old in this movie. Like
30,
and the weird thing about it is it's got that similarity to Rocky in that each film picks up right as the previous one left off.
Yeah.
But like in the Rocky films, it was very noticeable too that like Rocky's son would age like 5 years between trips to like Russia. And so that was kind of the...
Like, how long were they in Japan? Right.
Like, LaRusso gets off the plane, and again, his mom is just, like missing in action the whole time. But he's off the plane, and obviously taller. He's got a little bit more gut right here. Apparently the actor had a wife and kids at this point, and that's why they kiboshed the relationship that he was going to have with what's the girl's name? Robin Lively. Yeah, they actually kiboshed it because she was 15 and he was 27.
It's actually Blake Lively's half-sister.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, see, I knew her from Twin Peaks. She plays this woman who seduces everyone in town, including like the 80-year-old mayor. So
half-sister.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't know the film, again, it picks up moments after the original ended, but we kind of start off focusing on Kreese, John Kreese's character, Martin Kove, as he basically has been so emotionally wounded by the events of the first film. That he takes on kind of his buddy Terry Silver, who I think is a toxic waste dumper, who also has an investment in the Cobra Kai dojo, who basically sends Kreese on a vacation so that he can get his vengeance on LaRusso. And this is the central problem with the movie, is that we don't have Kreese for most of the movie. And
they sent him away.
Have
Mom.
Not even just Mom, but who's the villain? The villain of the first movie. William Zabka's character in the first movie doesn't return in this, and they tried to get both, but filming for Kreese was tough because he was filming a TV show at the time. Zabka also just couldn't work it out in the cards, so they replaced him with the Mike Barnes character.
Yes.
So can you imagine if this film had come full circle and they'd actually focused on Kreese and Zabka's return and really like their vengeance level,
like what they really wanted.
Yeah, but Thomas Ian Griffin is so overacting in this movie, and he was actually given some props from some of the reviewers at the time. I couldn't stand his character. He is the worst character in this franchise. Annoying, overacting, problematic, and just...
So it's a transition, and I'll talk a little bit about this feature of this villain. It comes probably, Die Hard start this, of a very rich, sleek, oily, scheming villain.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to put that kind of mentality into this movie, and then it gets played out a lot in the early 90s. You even get it in The Last Boy Scout of these sleek, rich suits. We even get in Romeo's Bleeding of this villainy that Alan Rickman started.
It's the white collar villain versus the
right, where the hair is all perfect and then ponytail and stuff, and then they got a bathtub, but it just doesn't. It's that cartoonish that we complained about in Karate Kid Part 2, and it's still in there where we're trying to ground this a little more reality, and he's trying to make it into a Saturday morning cartoon. You know, it's almost like he's
When it's the more noticeably retreading because the second one took a complete alternate turn and kind of did its own thing. That returning to it, any of the problems with this film are made more apparent because it is so carbon copied to the first. And again, we get that with Daniel LaRusso again, like breaking up with his girl from the previous film, and then another girl shows up, and it's kind of the same thing going on. And there was elements of this that I thought we were going to do something more interesting with. Like, I would have loved to have seen the separation of LaRusso and Miyagi. Like, really seen them, like, tested and pulled apart for a good amount. Because they don't really get that. They keep hinting like they're going to do it. Oh. And then Silver's plan is so hackneyed and weird. Like, where he's like, I'm going to destroy this kid I've never met before by, like, seducing him into my karate dojo and just training him one-on-one and like,
make him knuckles bleed simply by training him.
Yeah.
That's a reward?
I don't understand it at all. And that's the thing too, is it's obvious to me that Silver is not in the best interests of LaRusso, because he has trained with Miyagi now for 2 films and he knows enough about karate to recognize that the Cobra Kai dojo is not doing it right.
Yeah.
And
so there's like we talk about problems with Karate Kid Part 2, there's a lot of like, we already know, established this character, we already know, are familiar with him, that he would recognize, okay, stop, we're not going to do this anymore, but he continues on. So it's a lot of, we're hoping, that's what I'd say, there's a lot of potential, like, oh, we're going to go there, and it never really materializes.
Yeah.
Or there's a friction with Mr. Miyagi and Daniel's son, and that kind of gets washed over. Oh, whatever, we're friends now.
Yeah.
And by having a truce, they emphasize what was kind of his hobby, but that we're going to put on in front center this trope of bonsai trees, which is like, okay.
It feels like that's an interesting place to go with the narrative, and it doesn't hit it 100%. Like, it's, again, let's go to the characters, and let's look at the characters' lives, and the fact that LaRusso doesn't understand that this is kind of just a peaceful thing for Miyagi. He didn't really want to make it his life. Like, this is something that he can go to. Yeah. And his misunderstanding of how Miyagi likes the bonsai tree makes for an interesting beginning rift. Right? I thought that was going to help separate them more, and it just kind of goes in a weird direction with it where it doesn't ultimately do anything.
It does, yeah.
You know?
I remember when they critiqued this movie on television with, like, Entertainment Tonight and Roger Ebert, how they used the scene of them over the cliff replanting the bonsai tree. And Roger Ebert goes, that's a perfect metaphor of this movie. They went over the cliff trying to replant the seeds of what they did before, and it's not going to work.
Yeah. That's fair. That's a really, really fair argument right there. Yeah, for me, it's I thought Mike Barnes was a little bit over the top, and I thought Ian Griffith was way over the top. And what I wanted was Kreese. Like, I can't get over that problem with, like...
I think he wanted to be there.
Yeah, and instead he's, like, go on vacation, and then when he comes back, he's so over the top. And I guess what I just don't understand was, like, it feels like it's sputtering. We get Robert Mark Kamen returning to do the screenplay. He wrote the first 2 movies, and it just felt like they didn't... I read somewhere that he didn't have enough time. That, like, he was just frantically putting the story together because he was hired as a contractor. Yeah. And it feels like it's going in that same direction. Doesn't really have anything to say.
No. Right.
And it had so many opportunities to do that.
That's what I say. We like the potential. We thought we was going to go somewhere, you know, and then now all of a sudden we're dwelling on how come Daniel can't lock the front door.
Yeah.
Lock the front door, dude. I know you know karate, unless you want to invite trouble, and then you leave the front door open. Well, sure, then you want trouble, and then you beat them up, but it seems like you don't want trouble.
Yeah, well, and they seem to forget that that a binding contract with a karate competition can probably be gotten out of if you were put into it by distress. Or duress, I guess, if you will. Like, if that whole scene where Barnes and his goon are kind of, like, telling him, like, we're not going to raise this rope up unless you help us out. Like, for one thing, hiring Mike Barnes just because he's karate's bad boy doesn't necessarily make him a villain who's going to break the law and be a criminal and threaten children. It doesn't necessarily say that. But it just, like, if LaRusso signs this thing to get back in the karate tournament, he could probably go to the police and be like, hey, this guy threatened to kill me if I didn't sign this paperwork and I get out of this thing.
Yeah, and then, like Kyle is mentioning, there's a lot of times where we should want to focus on maybe, Daniel, I'm not a kid anymore. Yeah. I'm done with this stuff. And then people forcing me into this. There's a friction of probably, would it be interesting to develop, but here we're just getting this overarch, very overly villainous kind of monotony, cartoonish stuff. And I think it's like I said, it's a last grasp of 80s movies. Mm-hmm. It's almost a reluctance that we don't want to go, we don't want this to go away. It's almost like try it again.
Yeah, I pulled this one up on IMDb before I watched it, and the first shot that was at the top above the poster was the one of Kreese's surprise return, where he's like, and I was like, from the get go, we're gonna get some overacting here, and it's too bad. I feel like this is maybe the film that really kind of pushed this franchise in. Of course, we get a fourth film a few years later, but Ralph Macchio's not going to be back. Pat Morita takes over the reign of this one a little bit more in the next film. But I also think this is kind of the film that maybe would remind you as a Cobra Kai fan that we can do this right. Because I think there was a lot of avenues. Again, we can't get over the fact Macchio is definitely not 18 anymore. He still sounds pretty young, but the thing is you have to be under 18 to fight this.
Yeah, well, you should recognize it with your writing that he's the Karate Kid. I'm not a kid anymore.
Yeah, too much time has passed, and I think it's obvious that he's not a kid anymore.
Yeah.
So what you do then is you have to just, if you want to come back and make another film, find another way to make him useful to the plot. I think this film could have been successful had it actually attempted something that Rocky V also failed at, which is you make your fighter into the teacher. And I think you get an opportunity with Ralph Macchio's character where he could have been training the next Karate Kid, and Morita could have come in to help him when he failed at that and he needed the boost.
That's a good idea.
I think that would have been an interesting, because that's kind of what Rocky did in Rocky V. Was he, Tommy Gunn was the one that Rocky V was all about, where he was training Tommy Gunn, he failed at it, and then they were fighting in the street and stuff. And it's like, again, both films really just couldn't get that plot line to work, but I think it would have been an interesting aspect, because you definitely can't keep going on with this idea that he's 17.
No, and then you're wasting a lot of time. Well, why don't you do this? Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And rather than enjoying the film, and that takes you away, because you're like, oh, this does make sense. Why are you doing sit-ups and bed?
Yeah.
Which makes you kind of laugh, but yeah. And it does, one of my cardinal sins of writing is you make your bad guy bad all the time. Day, sleeping, he's completely just compulsionary evil. And that's not true all the time. Don't make your bad guys bad all the time. Have some little bit of we can relate to a little bit. There's a little bit of humanity in Darth Vader that we can recognize, that even though he tries to shove down.
Yeah, and that's what I came back to when I mentioned that in our opening here. Is there's that moment where Silver turns away from LaRusso when he's training. He's like, you don't need to have that cartoonish laugh that just we get that you're the bad guy and we get that you're the villain, but if I was Daniel LaRusso and I saw my sensei turn around and laugh, I'd be like, oh, that's kind of weird. I think I'm gonna go home.
So yeah, it's hard, because when you recycle something for the third time, you're gonna lose a lot of what we enjoyed the first time. Mm-hmm. And there's this first time watching, I can tell this is you can mute it and I can say this is 1989. This is where you can mute Karate Kid and you can say there's some things of the 70s, a little bit 80s, and you can tell, but you can tell the evolutionary of filmmaking from 84 to 89 how it's a massive step, where everything got amplified.
That's true. Yeah.
Even the villainies got amplified.
Yeah, everything became just a little bit more over the top. And, we mentioned this during our time with disaster films, was that kind of in the 90s, disaster films came back in a mega over the top kind of way. That's kind of what happened here. It was this was just kind of, everything was bumped up to the notch where the 80s was full of cheesy movies, but it felt like maybe in 1989, some of the cheese had started to mold in certain franchises.
Perfect.
And I think that was the case here, where this was some developed mold.
Right. We've done enough, and this is kind of what we talked about before, is there's a reluctance to move on. Mm-hmm. They want to keep this in a little bottle.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And then I think you have to enjoy that this is the last staple of the 80s here.
Yep. Yeah. So overall, I there were things I want to talk about that I think I did like about the film, though, because I had a very adverse reaction to a lot of it, just thinking about the things that were missed. I think Bill Conti's score is great. Bill Conti was known for the Rocky movies and also did some work on this franchise. Returns to do the score here again. I think it's another solid score from him. He has more avenues to work with because we're dealing with more fracturing of the relationships, and I think the music quality is pretty solid on it. I think it's pretty well shot as well. Steve.
Yeah, John G. He's not. We talked about he's a blunt filmmaker. He's going to shoot it as it is. No cleverness.
Yep. So I think his cinematography gives a little bit more. Steve Giaconelli has a little bit more like grandeur to the film.
Well, there's a little more depth, right?
Yeah. And I think the way he shoots certain sequences, like I do think the scene inside the bonsai shop is really well shot and it is captivating, and it hits that level of like believable realism where the movie is so not realistic, but it hits a level of like understanding. Reminded me of like that fight next to the fence in the first movie is what I meant. Yeah.
My favorite thing of the whole movie is the airport where he leaves and then they come back. I love that. It's a perfect trend. It's the best part of the movie. I don't like the action or the dialogue or anything. I don't really care, but that was wonderful.
Yeah. And even the bonsai thing too, which again it's a silly scene in a lot of ways, but it's well shot. It's well choreographed, and I was interested in what was happening there because it seemed like again like a fundamental misunderstanding of Macchio's character. Like LaRusso, again, he's like come through all this stuff, and he still hasn't grown in the ways that he needs to, and he doesn't understand that he's maybe being a little too invasive on Miyagi's world.
We're gonna hit it over the head. He needed to grow up.
Yep.
Yeah. We're dancing around it, but yeah, we wanted the character to grow up, and I think Mr. Miyagi had to recognize that. God, why did you leave? You should have stayed in Japan.
Yeah.
And first time watching, I'm watching why did he come back? And it doesn't really emphasize there was no need to come back other than them being in the movie.
Yeah. The only other thing I almost think, I mentioned the LaRusso character as a mentor. The only other thing that I think might have been a really captivating story point, and this, you guys might hate me for this, I think you could kill Miyagi off in this film. You give that, because in the Rocky films, when the story started to get repetitive, they started interjecting real life drama and trauma and pain. Have a serious injury. Have an emotional injury. Like, let's start stripping this character down to his most basic form and see how he reacts. That would have been pretty interesting to me too, because we start losing characters in the Rocky movies from 3 on. Every movie loses another character, and you feel the weight of that. And I think that kind of like forces our characters to grow to fill that empty void. And I think there's just a lot of ways that they just chose not to make LaRusso grow anymore.
So first time watching, I understand why it didn't get a lot of the good ratings. Mm-hmm. I think it was it came out the wrong time. Timing is a lot of things with movies. You're going to release this a couple weeks after Batman. Nobody's going to care anymore. I completely forgot this movie existed because, 89 was just Bo Jackson and Batman.
Yep.
And we're done with Karate Kid.
Well, you said Batman and Karate Kid 3. It reminded me of, I think it was Avengers Infinity War and Solo. Which is that was even a worse situation because that was the same studio releasing a movie 3 weeks after a mega hit that you knew was going to make $2 billion. Yeah. That's kind of the same thing. It's like Batman coming out the month before. I wasn't old enough at that point to know anything about like the marketing of it, but having owned the Batman video cassette when I was younger, I know that marketing was everywhere. I mean, there was an opening commercial before the movie started on that Batman VHS where he like drives by, I think, McDonald's and he gets a Pepsi, pulls out and stuff. And I remember that's like ingrained. I thought it was a scene in the movie growing up. But like that's the problem. It's like that movie was overly marketed to the point where like that thing had to make bank. And there was so much excitement, palpable excitement about Batman.
It was for months and months.
I would have bumped that Karate Kid movie. It just was like back then too. A movie could stay in theaters for 4 months because there wasn't as many films coming out. So you could have something that I think what E.T., which a few years earlier, of course, was in the theaters for over a year.
Right.
You could do that. You could get away with that.
Yeah, eventually we have to talk about the summer of '85 was so bad that they had to bring back 84 movies back in the theater. We have to talk about that because there was only one hit, and that was Back to the Future. Oh. But other than that, it was so awful they brought back Ghostbusters, Karate Kid, and Temple of Doom back in the theaters because the summer there was nothing.
That's probably what we're gonna get
this
summer. We're gonna probably get that this summer too, Nick.
Probably
because we've got all these movies that people are like, I might not release this one still. Like,
right. Let's bring these back. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's bring all of 1984's films back this year and bring them back into theaters. Anywho, I don't want to give it like a full recommendation here. I'm very mixed.
The only reason I recommend it is because you want to fill the trilogy And you probably want to see the solidification of this sleek, over-the-top, oily villains that we get throughout the 90s and where the lineage comes from.
Yeah. I would say, I don't know if there's anybody that will say this is their favorite film in the trilogy, but if you like the first two, especially if you like them as much as me, I don't want to say don't check it out. Because it definitely does, like, it has that Karate Kid style to it. It still feels like one of their movies.
Yeah.
It just maybe feels like, you know, when the Rocky movies got cheesier, they also got shorter. Like 3 onward is like 90 minutes. This film feels probably 20 minutes too long to embrace the cheese. If you had a cheesy villain and it was just a brisk runtime, I don't think it would be as noticeable. But we feel the length of the movie because of the cheese. So I'm going to say, if you like the first 2 movies, check this one out.
Yeah,
if you didn't, I can't honestly say this is going to sway you.
No, yeah, it's just, and you're going to probably do what I did. The potential of it, that this could have been something.
Yeah, it's a reminder of what we could have had, and that's maybe kind of what takes me out of it at the end. It hurt me, but you know, there's part of that 80s cheese that will always win out for me, and I do think the film has some fun to it, even though it's pretty bad.
If you want us to continue on, there's a good option for you. You can be part of the team and tell us what to do by joining the
Patreon. Yeah, patreon.com/CyleNickOnFilm. The link's down in the description. Check that out, and then you can help us for as low as $1 a month. You can be involved in helping us pick that theme. You can pick some movies. Do you realize, Nick, Starbucks costs like $4? You know, my wife gets a Starbucks every week, and I told her, I was like, you know, that's like money in the bank that could be going straight to Kyle and Nick on Film. So.
That could come to us and tell us what to do.
Exactly. She already is. Why not pay me for it?
Yeah.
So don't forget, you guys can also comment down below. Is this your favorite or your least favorite Karate Kid movie? We want to know that.
Yeah, fascinating.
And don't forget too, you can like and subscribe, and that way you'll get our content every time it drops. Yeah. Once again, guys, I'm Kyle Goethe, and you can find all my film reviews on goethefilmreviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and I'm not a kid anymore.
No.